Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I'm saying this because today, I don't want to sound like an idol, or a celebrity, or even a performer. I just want to sound like a person, a human being who's been carrying something heavy in his chest for a long time. Something about love, loyalty, and family. Something I can't keep quiet about anymore. I've spent years standing under lights so bright they blur everything else out. Cameras, cheers, noise, they make you forget what silence feels like. But there's a kind of silence that hits you when you're about to make one of the biggest choices of your life, marriage. That silence found me when I realized my family didn't want JIMIN at my wedding. Even saying those words feels unreal, like they belong to someone else's story. But they're mine. It started quietly, the way big problems often do. A comment here, a look there. My mom's voice dropping in tone when his name came up. My dad asking questions he already knew the answers to. Are you sure he should be there? You know how people talk. At first, I thought it was just nerves. They'd always been protective of me, and I get it. Fame makes every little thing feel bigger. But as the days went by, I realized it wasn't just about attention. It was deeper, older, something tangled in tradition and fear. I grew up believing family was unconditional. That no matter who you became or who you loved, your family would stand beside you. But fame changes the way people see you, even the ones closest to you. They start thinking about image, reputation, about what the neighbors will whisper when your name comes up at dinner tables. And suddenly, love feels like a performance too. When I told them JIMIN was coming, my mom stayed quiet for a moment too long. That pause said everything words couldn't. Do you really think that's wise, Jungkook? She asked softly. Wise? That word stung. I'd heard it before in boardrooms, in interviews, in places where emotions get turned into strategy. But not from her. Not about him. You see, JIMIN has been more than just a bandmate to me. He's been the person who held me up when I didn't even know I was falling. The one who noticed when I smiled too hard to hide exhaustion. The one who sat with me in hotel rooms when I couldn't sleep, just talking about life, about how weird it is to grow up in front of millions of people. He's seen the sides of me that no camera could ever catch. And maybe that's what scared my family. They saw how close we were, the trust, the quiet understanding that doesn't need words. They didn't understand it, so they feared it. Maybe they thought it would confuse people, that it would make headlines for the wrong reasons. But to me, it was simple. He was my friend, my brother, the person who taught me how to breathe again when everything got too heavy. How could I celebrate one of the most important days of my life without him there? I remember sitting in my studio one night, lights off, just me and the hum of the speakers. I played an old demo JIMIN and I recorded years ago, our voices raw, cracked, imperfect. It reminded me of everything pure about what we built together. Not the fame, not the awards, just the music and the friendship that came before it. I closed my eyes and realized how much I owed to that connection. And that's when I knew I couldn't let fear decide who belonged in my life. When I told my parents I was firm on inviting him, the silence in the room was louder than any argument. My dad leaned back, eyes fixed on the floor. My mom looked away, her hand trembling slightly as she poured tea. You know we love you, she said, but some things are better kept separate. The wedding is family, private. I wanted to tell her that JIMIN is family, that he's been part of my story longer than anyone outside those walls could understand. But I couldn't, because in that moment, I saw something. Her fear wasn't of him, it was of losing me. She was afraid the world I lived in, this loud, unpredictable, spotlight world, had changed me into someone she no longer recognized. And maybe, in some ways, she was right. Fame had given me so much, but it had also taken the simplicity out of relationships. Everything became filtered through public perception, even love, even friendship. That night, I went to the rooftop of my apartment. It was raining lightly, the city lights flickering below like restless stars. I called JIMIN. I didn't even know what I wanted to say. Maybe to warn him, maybe to apologize. But he just laughed softly when he heard my voice. You don't need to explain anything, Kook, he said. People don't always understand what they haven't felt. There was no bitterness in his tone, just calm acceptance, like he'd already made peace with it. That broke me a little, because while I was wrestling with guilt and loyalty, he was just choosing love, the quiet kind that doesn't need to be defended. In the days that followed, I started thinking about what family really means. Is it the people who share your blood, or the ones who share your silence? The ones who raised you, or the ones who rebuilt you when life knocked you down? Maybe it's both. Maybe it's complicated. Namjoon once told me something I'll never forget. We were sitting backstage after a show, the crowd still echoing in our bones. He said, "Kook, sometimes the hardest part of growing up isn't finding yourself. It's staying yourself when everyone has an opinion about who you should be." I didn't fully get it then, but now, standing between the world I was born into and the one I built, I understand exactly what he meant. Taehyung noticed too. He's always had this quiet intuition, like he can read people without them saying a word. One night, he sent me a text. "Whatever happens, don't let guilt make your choices for you." Simple, direct, but it hit deep, because guilt had been guiding me for weeks. Guilt for disappointing my family, guilt for causing tension, guilt for wanting both worlds to coexist peacefully when maybe they couldn't. Jinhyung called the situation the kind of story you'll tell your kids one day. And I laugh because he always finds a way to make heavy things lighter. Suga-hyung said nothing at all at first. He just listened. Then told me, "Do what brings you peace, not applause." And Hobie, with that radiant energy that never fades, just said, "A wedding without love isn't a wedding. It's a performance." Their words became a map, each one pointing me closer to what I already knew, but was too scared to admit that this decision was about love, not approval, about truth, not appearances. As the wedding day drew closer, I found myself reflecting on the journey that brought me here. The years of rehearsals, sleepless nights, airport goodbyes, laughter in tiny dressing rooms, the shared meals that felt like home no matter what country we were in. BTS wasn't just a group, it was a family I chose, and JIMIN was one of the closest pieces of that family. I started imagining the ceremony without him, the empty chair where his laughter should be, the photos missing that one familiar smile. It felt wrong, like a melody missing its harmony, and I realized I couldn't start this new chapter by erasing someone who had shaped so much of the previous one. So, I made a choice. Quietly, without announcement, without drama. I told my parents I respected their feelings, but I needed to follow mine. I said, "Mom, Dad, you taught me that family means standing by the people who stand by you. I'm just doing what you taught me." There were tears not of anger, but of understanding. Because even when we disagree, love still speaks louder than pride. In the end, I didn't know how it would all turn out. Maybe people would talk, maybe some would misunderstand. But I've learned that peace doesn't come from everyone agreeing with your choices. It comes from knowing you made them with honesty. As I speak these words, I'm sitting by a window overlooking the city where it all began. The night is calm. There's music somewhere in the distance, maybe from another rooftop, maybe from a stranger's radio. And I think about how strange and beautiful life is, how it takes you from one chapter to the next, asking you to let go, to forgive, to understand. To my family, if you're listening, I know it wasn't easy. I know your fears came from love, but love shouldn't be afraid of truth. And the truth is, JIMIN is part of who I am, not just as an artist, but as a person. To the members, thank you for reminding me who I am when I forget. To ARMY, you've seen us through every version of ourselves. You've taught me that love, in its purest form, has no conditions. And to JIMIN, thank you for staying kind, even when the world wasn't. For teaching me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is show up, even when we're not wanted, even when it hurts. Maybe someday, when people look back at that wedding photo, they won't see controversy or gossip. They'll see a story about forgiveness, about choosing love in a world that often prefers spectacle. Because in the end, that's what life really is, a series of choices between fear and love. And this time I chose love. There's something that happens when you finally choose peace over explanation. The noise doesn't disappear, it just stops mattering as much. After I told my parents my decision, I didn't sleep that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the patterns of light from passing cars sliding across the walls like thoughts I couldn't quiet. I kept thinking about how love always comes with the price, and how the price of honesty is often misunderstanding. In the morning I made coffee, the kind JIMIN taught me to make just enough bitterness to wake you, just enough sweetness to make you stay. The smell filled the kitchen, and for a moment I could almost believe everything was simple again. I sent him a text. Hyung is decided. I want you there. He didn't reply right away, and that silence hurt more than any argument could. Maybe he needed time, or maybe he didn't want to believe I'd finally said it out loud. Later that day, I went to rehearsal with the members. The studio was buzzing, like always, beats looping, microphones hanging like questions in the air. Taehyung was humming something under his breath. J-Hope dancing in that effortless rhythm only he has. For a while, I just watched them, thinking about how many seasons we'd lived through together. Every tour, every late night ramen run, every argument that turned into laughter. They were my second home long before I realized I needed one. When I told them about the situation with my family, no one interrupted. They all just listened, the room settling into that heavy quiet that comes when words finally stop pretending. RM spoke first, voice calm but firm. Kook, families love deeply, but sometimes they love from fear. Don't fight the fear, just show them something stronger. He always had a way of sounding like both a brother and a guide, and those words stayed with me. Suga leaned back in his chair, eyes thoughtful. They'll understand one day, he said. Maybe not now, but love like that doesn't vanish. It just hides behind walls until it feels safe again. And I knew he was right. My parents had never stopped loving me. They were just scared of what they didn't fully understand, scared of how the world might twist the picture of us. That evening, I sat by the piano and started writing. Not a song, exactly, just notes that matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. Each chord felt like a piece of the story I couldn't tell anyone yet. Sometimes music is the only way I can make sense of life, because it doesn't need permission to be honest. It doesn't care who approves. It just exists, raw and imperfect, like love itself. When JIMIN finally called that night, his voice was quiet. You sure about this? He asked. I could hear him smile a little, that nervous laugh he does when he's trying to sound strong. I don't want to be the reason there's tension on your day. I told him the truth. You're not the reason. You're part of the reason. I can face it. There was silence on the line again, but this time it felt full, not empty. The kind of silence that says I understand. The days leading up to the wedding blurred together. Outfits, rehearsals, photographers, family dinners filled with polite conversation and hidden tension. My mother tried to act normal, but I could see it in her eyes, that mixture of pride and worry only a parent can have. I caught her watching me once as I adjusted my tie in the mirror, her reflection soft behind mine. You look just like your father did on our wedding day, she whispered. And for the first time in weeks, we both smiled without words. I think part of growing up is realizing that love and conflict often share the same space. That sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the same ones who are terrified of losing you. My parents didn't mean harm, they were just trying to protect a version of me that no longer existed. The little boy who followed rules without question, who didn't know that love could challenge tradition. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep again. I went outside, barefoot on the cold balcony, watching the city glow like a living heartbeat. I thought about everything our debut days. The first time we heard ARMY scream our names. The nights JIMIN stayed up with me when the pressure felt too heavy to carry. I thought about how fragile fame is, how it builds walls and expectations that have nothing to do with who you really are. And I realized something. This wedding wasn't about image or perfection. It was about truth. about finally stepping into a life where I didn't have to hide the people who shaped me. When the morning came, the sky was soft and gray, the kind of calm light that makes everything feel honest. I walked into the ceremony hall early, before anyone else arrived. The chairs were lined up perfectly, flowers in muted tones of white and cream, the air thick with that quiet before everything begins. I stood at the front, imagining the faces that would soon fill those seats. Family, friends, members, people who had seen me at my highest and lowest. And I pictured JIMIN there, his small smile, the way he always sits with his hands folded politely but eyes full of emotion. Just the thought of it gave me strength. When my parents arrived, my father pulled me aside. He didn't say much, just placed a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever happens today," he said, "make sure it's something you can live with tomorrow." It wasn't approval, but it wasn't rejection either. It was something in between, acceptance still finding its way home. The ceremony began. The music played. My heart pounded louder than any drum beat I'd ever heard on stage. As I walked down the aisle, I caught glimpses of the people I love RM giving me a small nod, Jin smiling like a proud older brother, Hobie wiping at his eyes already, Suga pretending not to, Taehyung giving me a look that said we made it here somehow. And then I saw him, JIMIN, sitting quietly, almost hidden among the guests, his expression unreadable at first. But when our eyes met, it was like the noise of the world faded away. He smiled, soft, understanding, proud. In that single moment, every argument, every sleepless night, every fear disappeared. After the vows, during the music, I caught my mom watching him. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave a small nod. It wasn't much, but it was everything. A silent truce born from love's stubborn endurance. Later that night, when the celebration quieted and the crowd thinned, I found JIMIN outside under the lanterns. The air was cool, the stars faint behind city haze. He looked up when I approached. "You did it," he said with a laugh, half teasing. "You really had me here." "I couldn't do it without you," I replied, and I meant it in ways words couldn't hold. He shrugged. "Your parents look peaceful at the end." "Yeah," I said, exhaling. "Maybe they finally saw what I see." "What's that?" he asked. "That love doesn't have to fit into a picture frame to be real." He smiled again, that small, knowing smile that's carried me through so many storms. "Then maybe it was worth it." I looked around the lights, the laughter drifting from inside, the faint echo of a song someone was still playing. And for the first time all day, I felt completely still, like everything had finally settled into its place. That night, when everyone was gone, I sat alone at the piano again, my tie undone, my hands trembling from the weight of it all. I played the melody from earlier, the one that had followed me through every doubt. It sounded different now, lighter, whole. I realized something important then. Family doesn't always start from birth. Sometimes it's the people who stay, who listen, who understand without being told. And sometimes it takes standing up to the people you love to remind them what love actually means. I'm not angry at my parents. If anything, I'm grateful. Their hesitation taught me to define love for myself, to stop waiting for approval and start living with truth. And if you're listening right now, maybe there's someone in your life who doesn't understand your choices, your heart, your path. Don't hate them for it. Show them. Show them the kind of love that doesn't need to win an argument to be seen. Because in the end, that's all any of us are trying to do, to be seen, to be understood, to belong somewhere that feels honest. That night, before I fell asleep, I sent JIMIN one last text. "Thank you for coming. You made today real." His reply came a few minutes later. "You made today brave." And for the first time in a long while, I slept peacefully knowing that even if the world didn't understand, my heart finally did. After the wedding, there was this strange quiet that hung in the air for days. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels full. like it's holding its breath, waiting for you to notice what's changed. I woke up the next morning to sunlight spilling through the curtains, my suit jacket still draped over the chair, the faint smell of flowers lingering in the room. It was over, but in my chest, something had only just begun. I walked to the kitchen barefoot, the floor cool under my feet. My phone buzzed, nonstop messages. Congratulations. Photos. But I didn't open any of them right away. I just stood there, holding a cup of coffee, staring out at the city that had witnessed every version of me. The kid who came here chasing a dream, the man who built a life from the noise, and now someone who finally understood what peace felt like. My parents were flying out that afternoon. Before they left, my mom hugged me for a long time. There were no words, just that kind of quiet where everything unspoken gets said anyway. When she finally let go, she smiled faintly and said, "You looked happy yesterday, really happy. That was all I needed." For the first time, I felt like she had seen what I'd been trying to show her all along, that happiness doesn't need to be approved to be true. Later that day, I met up with the members at the studio. It felt almost symbolic, like returning to where it all started. The moment I walked in, they started teasing me, throwing jokes about how I finally crossed over. J-Hope was dancing around with a plastic bouquet, Jin pretending to officiate another ceremony. The laughter was loud, real. It filled the space the way music does naturally, without trying. JIMIN was there too. He was quieter than usual, sitting on the couch, eyes soft, with that familiar warmth. When our eyes met, we both just smiled. There was no need for long conversations or dramatic thank yous. He already knew. We started playing around with some chords, something easy and light. Music has this strange way of healing without you noticing. A few notes, a shared glance, and suddenly the air feels different, lighter, forgiving. Suga recorded a loop, Taehyung hummed a melody, and soon it felt like old times again. The kind of moment that reminds you that no matter how much life changes, some things stay sacred. At one point, Namjoon turned to me and said, "You know, Cook, sometimes you don't need to fix what people think. You just need to live in a way that makes their assumptions irrelevant." I nodded, because that's exactly what this whole thing had been about, living my truth so loudly that misunderstanding eventually has no room left to grow. That night, when everyone had gone home, I stayed behind. The studio was quiet except for the hum of the monitors. I scrolled through my messages again, army flooding my feed with love and blessings, photos from fans around the world who somehow turned even my personal moments into something they celebrated too. It made me emotional, because no matter how public my life becomes, there's still something so deeply private about the way people care. They don't just love the idol, they love the human underneath. I thought about writing a post explaining everything, clarifying the rumors that had started circling, whispers about family tension, old grudges, the kind of drama people invent when they don't have the whole story. But then I stopped. I realized not everything sacred needs defending. Sometimes silence is stronger than 1,000 explanations. A few days later, I visited my parents again. This time, the air felt lighter. My dad was in the garden, trimming the small lemon tree he'd planted years ago. He didn't look up when I walked out, just said, "The ceremony was beautiful. You handled it well." I knew what he meant. It was his way of saying he respected my choices, even if he didn't fully understand them yet. Inside, my mom showed me an envelope on the counter. It was the photo the wedding photographer had sent, a candid shot of everyone laughing. And right there, in the corner of the frame, was Jimin, laughing too. She pointed to it and said softly, "That one, that's my favorite." It took me a second to process that, but when I did, I felt something in me ease, like a knot slowly untangling. Acceptance doesn't always come with a speech. Sometimes it arrives quietly, hidden inside moments like that. That night, I sat down to write again. Not a song, but something else. I wrote about what it means to grow up, how we spend our early years trying to please everyone, and then spend our later ones trying to remember who we were before the world told us who to be. I wrote about love, how it isn't just about romance, but about courage, about showing up for people even when it's hard. And I wrote about forgiveness, how it's not about erasing pain, but learning to live with it gently. When I finished, I didn't post it anywhere. I just kept it for myself. A reminder that sometimes the things that shape us the most are the ones we don't broadcast. A week later, JIMIN came by the house. We sat outside, watching the sunset, sharing tea like we used to during trainee days, when we didn't have much but dreams and trust. He asked me how I felt now that it was all over. I thought for a second, then said, "Free! Not from anyone, but from needing to explain myself." He nodded, smiling. "That's when you really start living," he said. We didn't talk about the tension, the press, or the gossip. We just existed. Two friends, sitting quietly, grateful for the storm that passed and the peace that followed. As the evening faded into night, the city lights came alive, and I realized something beautiful. Life doesn't always give you closure in big moments. Sometimes it gives you peace in small ones. In the laughter of friends, in the soft forgiveness of family, in the quiet understanding of someone who's walked beside you through every season. Before he left, JIMIN hugged me. "I'm proud of you, Kook," he said. "You didn't just protect me, you protected love itself." I didn't know how to respond. So I just held on to that moment, hoping it would stay with me forever. Later that night, I stood by the window again. The same view, the same skyline, but a different heart inside me. I thought about how strange it is that something as painful as rejection can lead you back to love in a purer form. My family's hesitation had tested me, but it had also shown me how strong love can be when it refuses to bend. And as I looked out at the world below, I whispered a quiet thank you to them, to my brothers, to Army, and to JIMIN. Because every part of this journey had led me here to a place where I could finally say, without hesitation or fear, that I am loved and I am understood. Not perfectly, not by everyone, but enough. The weeks after the wedding passed like a blur of light and silence. Some mornings I'd wake up and forget it had even happened. Other days I'd catch a smell, flowers, cologne, rain, and the whole thing would come rushing back in flashes. The vows, my mother's trembling smile, JIMIN's quiet nod from across the aisle. It's strange how the mind holds on to fragments instead of the full picture, as if it knows the small things are what keep us human. I started spending more time alone after that. Not because I was sad, just reflective. I'd go for long walks near the Han River, wearing a hoodie and mask, watching couples stroll by, kids chasing pigeons, old men feeding fish. Life kept moving, unaware of the storms people carried inside. Sometimes I'd stop at a small bench by the water where the reflection of Seoul's skyline looked like another world beneath the surface. I'd sit there for hours thinking about how everything I'd feared, conflict, judgment, misunderstanding, had turned out softer than I expected. One afternoon, Taehyung joined me. He didn't say much at first, just handed me a cup of coffee. The sky was gray, the air smelled like rain. After a while, he said, "You know, Hyung and I talked. We think your parents just needed time." I nodded. "Yeah, maybe love just takes longer to catch up than anger does." He laughed softly. "You always find a way to turn pain into poetry." We sat there watching the water. A boat drifted by, slow and steady. It reminded me of how everything in life seems urgent until you realize it isn't. Sometimes peace doesn't mean everything's okay, it just means you've stopped fighting yourself. Later that night, we met up with the others for dinner. RM had reserved a quiet place where we wouldn't be recognized. There was laughter again, the kind that shakes years of tension loose. Jin made jokes about how long it took me to finally grow up. Hobie kept raising his glass for endless toasts, and Yoongi, in his usual understated way, said, "You look calmer lately. That's good." Jimin sat across from me. He was smiling, not just with his lips, but with his whole face. It's a small thing, but anyone who knows him knows that when Jimin smiles like that, it means his heart is at ease. For the first time in months, I felt the same. At one point, RM asked me quietly, "Do you think your family will ever talk about it again?" I thought for a moment before answering. Maybe, or maybe we don't need to. Maybe the silence after love is louder than the arguments before it. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mom. Just a photo. It was a shot of our family dining table back home empty, except for 2 cups of coffee. Hers and my dad's. Underneath, she wrote, "We left a seat for him next time." No name, no explanation. Just that. I read it a dozen times before replying with a single heart emoji, because some messages don't need words to be understood. I drove to Busan that weekend. I hadn't been home properly in a while. The air there feels different, saltier, heavier with memory. The small streets where I used to ride my bike were still the same, though the shops had new names and the faces were older. I stopped by the park near my old school. The swings creaked in the wind. It smelled like summer from 10 years ago. I sat there thinking about who I used to be, the quiet kid with big dreams. The one who thought success would fix everything. But fame doesn't erase old scars. It just teaches you how to live around them. I realized that the boy sitting on that swing all those years ago couldn't have imagined this version of me. Standing on stages, facing millions, yet still longing for something as simple as acceptance. That night, I met up with my brother. He's always been more grounded than me, quieter, wiser, in a way that doesn't need words. We talked over grilled fish and makioli, the kind of meal that brings you back to reality no matter how far you've drifted. After a while, he said, "Mom's learning, Dad too. They just didn't know how to love your world yet." That hit me, because he was right. Sometimes the people who raised you can't immediately love the version of you that fame creates. It's not rejection, it's just confusion. Before leaving Busan, I stopped by my parents' house. My dad was fixing something in the yard, my mom watering her plants. She looked up and smiled, that small, hesitant smile mothers give when they're trying to make peace without reopening wounds. She asked if I wanted dinner. I said yes. We didn't talk about the wedding or about JIMIN, but halfway through the meal she said quietly, "He looked kind." That was all, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. Sometimes healing hides inside the smallest sentences. When I drove back to Seoul that night, I played one of our older songs in the car, something from the early days, when everything still felt raw and uncertain. My voice back then sounded younger, but also freer. It reminded me that even when things get complicated, the core of who we are never really changes. It just learns to speak more gently. Back in Seoul, I went straight to the studio. I sat at the piano again, the same one where I'd written all those scattered notes before the wedding. This time, the melody came easier. It wasn't sad, it was tender, full of warmth. I recorded a short demo, no lyrics, just feeling. I named the file "For the Ones Who Stayed." A few days later, JIMIN came by. He listened to it quietly, eyes closed. When it ended, he said softly, "That's what forgiveness sounds like." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We talked for a long time after that about growing up, about how strange it is that our lives belong to millions, yet still feel private in ways no one will ever see. We laughed about how different we were as trainees, how I used to hide behind my shyness while he hid behind his confidence. Somewhere between the laughter and the silence, I realized that what I'd been fighting for wasn't just his presence at a wedding. It was permission to love openly, to live honestly, to let my story include every person who shaped me. That night, after he left, I looked through an old photo album my mom had given me when I first moved to Seoul. Inside was a picture from our trainee dorm days, me, JIMIN, and the others, sitting on the floor surrounded by instant noodles and empty water bottles, eyes tired but smiling like the world belonged to us. I stared at that photo for a long time, thinking, maybe it still does. Maybe love and loyalty, no matter how tested, always find their way back home. The world outside was quiet again. I turned off the lights, let the glow of the city spill across the room, and whispered a prayer of gratitude to my parents for learning, to my brothers for understanding, to Army for never needing explanations. and to Jimin for staying, even when he could have walked away. And as I closed my eyes, I finally understood what peace really feels like. It's not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of understanding. In the weeks that followed, I started to feel the strange quiet that comes after a storm. Not emptiness, but that stillness where the air feels freshly washed, like the world is giving you a second chance to breathe. I'd walk through Seoul at night with a hoodie pulled low, no destination in mind, just letting the city hum around me. The neon lights reflected on wet pavement looked like veins of color running through the streets. And every reflection reminded me of how many versions of myself were still out there somewhere. The son, the artist, the friend, the man trying to learn what forgiveness really means. One night, while wandering, I found myself outside an old cafe I used to visit during trainee days. It was small, tucked between buildings that had changed so much, I almost didn't recognize the place. The sign still flickered, the smell of coffee still hung in the air. I went inside, sat at the same table near the window, and ordered the same drink I used to get a simple Americano back when I couldn't afford anything else. The owner didn't recognize me, and that anonymity felt like a blessing. For a few minutes, I was just another person nursing a quiet moment. I thought about my family again, about how love changes form as you grow older. When you're a kid, love feels loud, birthdays, dinners, laughter. As you grow up, it becomes quieter, more complicated. It hides behind glances, behind words unspoken, behind people doing their best, even when they don't understand you. My parents weren't villains in my story, they were just human, shaped by different times, different fears. I remembered something my father said when I was younger. He told me, "A man's peace comes when his choices stop being about proving and start being about believing." Back then, I didn't really get it, but sitting in that cafe, I finally did. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to fans, not to media, not even to my family. I just believed in what love looked like for me. And that belief felt like freedom. Later that week, I met up with RM again. We took a late night drive along the highway, windows down, music low. He's always been the person I go to when thoughts feel too heavy to hold alone. He asked how I was doing, and for once I didn't have to fake strength. "I think I'm finally okay," I said. "Not perfect, just okay." He smiled. "That's better than perfect. Perfect breaks. Okay bends." We talked about how our lives have become a constant balance between the public and the personal. About how people think they know you from what they see, but never realize how much of you exists in silence. He told me that what I did, the choice to include Jimin, despite everything, wasn't just about friendship. It was about integrity. "You aligned your heart with your truth," he said. "That's rare." The next morning, J-Hope invited everyone to the practice room. He said he wanted to celebrate properly now that the dust had settled. I showed up expecting maybe a small hangout, but the moment I walked in, confetti flew everywhere. Hobie shouted, "For our golden maknae's golden peace." Everyone laughed. There was music, takeout boxes stacked high, and a playlist full of old BTS demos that we hadn't heard in years. For a few hours, it felt like time had folded back. Just us. Unfiltered, messy, happy. Jimin arrived late, carrying a small bag. He handed it to me without a word. Inside was a framed photo from the wedding, the one my mom had mentioned. The corner showed her faint smile and his hand half raised in a wave. Beneath it, he'd written in neat handwriting, "For the moment they finally saw you." I didn't know what to say, so I hugged him instead. That photo now sits on my piano. Every time I look at it, I'm reminded that understanding doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives like dawn, slow, soft, inevitable. Days turned into weeks, and the noise around the wedding started to fade. Interviews moved on, the press found new stories. And I found peace in the quiet routines again, morning workouts, late night writing sessions, cooking, breakfast, just because I could. It felt like life was offering me normalcy as a gift, one I hadn't realized I missed. One night, I was writing lyrics about forgiveness when Jimin called. He said he was working on something new, something honest. We talked for hours about art and how it often mirrors what we can't say in real life. We agreed that our next song together wouldn't be about fame or loss, it would be about faith. Not religious faith, but the kind that keeps you believing in people even after they've hurt you. When I hung up, I sat there thinking about how strange and sacred that word is, faith. It's what kept BTS together when the world doubted us. It's what kept me standing when my own heart wanted to run. It's what brought my parents and Jimin into the same room, even if just for one day, and let love speak louder than fear. I think that's the real miracle of life, not the awards, not the stages, but the moments when hearts that once opposed each other start beating in rhythm again. A few days later, I got a letter from a fan. It wasn't fancy, just a small note written in purple ink. She said, "My parents don't understand me either, but when I saw you choose love instead of fear, I decided to stop hiding who I am. Thank you." I read it 3 times, tears blurring the words. That's when it hit me. Maybe that's why all of this happened. Maybe the struggle wasn't meant to break me, it was meant to make someone else feel less alone. We never really know who we're inspiring when we choose honesty. Sometimes it's a stranger across the world. Sometimes it's the person in the mirror. That night I went back to the river. The water was still, the city alive around it. I sat there again, this time, not as a man caught between 2 worlds, but as someone who had finally found his balance. I thought about how love changes shapes, it bends, it stretches, it waits. But if it's real, it always returns. And as I watched the reflection of the skyline ripple in the current, I whispered something to myself, barely audible beneath the wind. Thank you for teaching me that love isn't about being understood, it's about being brave enough to stay. There's something about silence after healing that feels almost too delicate to touch, like a thin layer of glass over still water. You don't want to move too fast, afraid you'll shatter it. That's how life felt after everything settled. My family had stopped questioning, the members had stopped worrying, and I had stopped defending. For the first time in years, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I could just be. I started waking up earlier, before sunrise, when the sky still wore that soft gradient between night and light. I'd stand by the window with coffee in my hands and watch Seoul stretch itself awake. Some mornings I'd think about the kid I used to be, the one who hid behind music because words felt too heavy. Back then, I thought love was something that had to be earned. But now I was learning that love is what remains when everything else falls away. One morning, I got a call from my mother. Her voice sounded lighter than usual. She said, "We're having dinner next weekend. Bring whoever you want." She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. It was enough. I hung up and just stared at my phone, realizing how much healing can hide behind a single sentence. I called Jimin later that day. He laughed when I told him, "Are you sure your mom's ready for me to eat her food?" he teased. I laughed too, but part of me is still worried. "I think she's ready," I said. "Maybe we all are." The week went by quickly, filled with rehearsals, interviews, and quiet in-between moments that felt heavier than the noise. On the day of the dinner, I remember feeling nervous, not like before a concert, but like before a conversation that might rewrite a small part of your life. Jimin arrived at my apartment early. He wore something simple: black jeans, a soft gray sweater, that calm smile that could disarm any storm. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, though my hands told a different story. The drive to Busan was quiet at first. The road curved through memories I hadn't visited in a while. I kept thinking about the last time we'd all been in the same room. The tension, the unspoken things, the heaviness that hung in the air. But as the sea came into view, I felt something inside me loosen. You can't hold on to anger while looking at the ocean. It's too vast for grudges. When we arrived, my mom was waiting at the door. She smiled nervously, and for a moment, the world felt small again. "Come in," she said softly. Jimin bowed politely, his voice gentle. "Thank you for having me." My dad appeared behind her, nodding with that quiet dignity he always carries. It was strange, so much history standing in one small doorway, but no one knew where to begin. Dinner was simple. Kimchi, stew, rice, banchan, the kind of food that tastes like home no matter how long you've been away. My mom asked about our latest album, about the tour, about the fans. Jimin answered with his usual humility, complimenting her cooking between every few bites. My dad listened, occasionally offering a small smile. Slowly, the tension started to fade. At one point, my mom got up to bring more side dishes, and Jimin insisted on helping her. She laughed a real laugh this time and said, "You remind me of Jungkook when he was younger," always trying to be polite. He smiled. "I think he learned that from you." The words hung there for a second, soft and sincere, and in that moment, something invisible shifted. When dinner ended, we moved to the living room. My dad poured tea while my mom brought out an old photo album. She opened to a page filled with pictures from my childhood, me covered in sand at the beach, me playing guitar for the first time, me holding a tiny cake on my 10th birthday. She turned the page and said, "You were always happiest when you were surrounded by people you cared about." I think that's still true. Jimin looked at me and smiled. My mom looked at both of us, then said, "I may not always understand your world, Jungkook, but I can see it's filled with good people, and that's enough for me." Those words hit harder than I expected, because they weren't just about Jimin, they were about everything. My career, my friends, my choices. It was her way of saying she trusted me again. Later, as we were leaving, my mom handed Jimin a small container. "For the road," she said. "Homemade kimchi. I make it with too much spice, but you look like someone who can handle it." He laughed. "I'll try my best." She smiled again this time. No hesitation, no distance, just warmth. On the drive back, Jimin was quiet for a while, then said, "You know, Kook, I think your mom likes me more than you now." I laughed until my eyes watered. "She probably does," I said. "But that's a good thing." We fell silent again. But it was the kind of silence that felt alive, comfortable, full, safe, the kind that exists between people who've walked through storms together and still choose to stay. When we reached Seoul, I dropped him off near his place. Before he got out, he turned to me. "You did good," he said. "You didn't fight them, you showed them." I nodded. "Thanks for showing up." He smiled. "Always." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was restless, but because I was full of gratitude, full of peace. I thought about how strange it is that love, when it's real, doesn't demand proof. It just keeps showing up until fear runs out of places to hide. In the following days, I noticed small things. My mom texting Jimin recipes. My dad asking how our next project was going. It wasn't perfect harmony, but it was progress. And maybe that's what real love looks like. Not the absence of pain, but the decision to keep building after it. I found myself writing again. The melody that had started before the wedding had grown into a full song now. It wasn't about conflict anymore, it was about home. The kind of home that doesn't always have walls or doors, but people. I called it Return. When I played it for the members, the room went quiet. After it ended, Namjoon said, "This sounds like the moment peace finally found you." Maybe he was right, because when I look back at everything, every argument, every sleepless night, every tear I tried to hide, it all led to this moment. A simple dinner, a soft smile, a quiet reconciliation, and I realized that love isn't proven on grand stages or in perfect pictures. It's proven in the small, unseen acts of forgiveness that build bridges where walls used to be. As I sit here now, finishing this thought, I understand something I never did before. Peace doesn't come from everyone loving you. It comes from you loving them, even when it's hard. And that's the kind of love I want to carry forward for my family, for Jimin, for the members, for ARMY, and for myself. After that dinner, life began to move in a gentler rhythm. It's strange how peace never announces itself. It just drifts in quietly, and suddenly you realize the world stopped feeling like a battlefield. My phone wasn't ringing with worry anymore. My parents were calling just to ask what I'd eaten. And the members, well, They were back to teasing me like nothing monumental had ever happened. Maybe that's what healing really looks like. When something once painful becomes just another story that ends in laughter. I spent the next few weeks focusing on music again. The studio became my favorite place in the world. Not because of the equipment or the fame attached to it, but because it's the one room where honesty doesn't feel like confession. You can pour everything into a melody and somehow it forgives you. I was recording vocals one afternoon when JIMIN dropped by unannounced, 2 iced coffees in hand and that familiar smirk that always gives him away. "You look too serious," he said. "Let's ruin the tape." He didn't. He just sat quietly in the corner, humming along, adding small harmonies under his breath. When we listened back later, his voice slipped through mine like a heartbeat underneath a song. It was perfect. After we finished, we went for a walk along the river again. The sun was setting, staining the sky in gold and violet. He asked me if I ever regretted anything about how things went down. I thought about it for a moment. "Maybe I regret not trusting love sooner," I said. But then again, maybe I needed to lose my balance to learn how to stand. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the water. "That's growth," he said simply. Sometimes I forget how much he sees without me saying a word. JIMIN has always been that mirror, the one that shows me not what I want to see, but what's real. He's gentle, but his honesty cuts straight to the truth. That night, I dreamed of home again. Not the physical house, but the feeling voices overlapping at the dinner table. Music spilling from the living room, laughter echoing through hallways. When I woke up, I realized I didn't miss a place. I missed the simplicity of connection. The kind you don't have to defend or define. My parents called later that day. My mother asked if JIMIN liked the kimchi, and when I told her he'd said it was perfect, she laughed. "Next time I'll make more," she said. That next time felt like a bridge, a promise that we wouldn't have to walk on eggshells anymore. In the following days, I saw the members more often. We'd gather in the practice room late at night, pretending to work, but mostly just existing. Taehyung brought his guitar, Yoongi played random chords on the piano, Hobie recorded us messing around, RM scribbled words in his notebook, Jin complained about our snacks. It felt like youth rediscovered different, but somehow the same. JIMIN leaned against the wall beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. "You feel lighter," he said quietly. "Maybe peace looks good on you." I smiled. "Maybe peace looks like all of you." We ended up staying until dawn, watching the sun creep through the blinds. There's something holy about mornings with friends who've seen every version of you and still stay. Fame can take a lot. It can make you doubt yourself, make you question who's real, but it can't erase what's built on shared struggle. Later that week, I visited the beach alone. It had been years since I'd gone without cameras or schedules. The wind was cold, and the sound of waves felt like music with no end. I wrote JIMIN's name in the sand, then erased it with my foot, smiling. It wasn't about nostalgia, it was about gratitude. For every late night talk, every argument that ended in laughter, every moment that reminded me that love doesn't always need to be spoken to be known. When I came home, there was a small package waiting. Inside was a handwritten note from my father. "You were right. Family is the people who stand beside you when it matters." Underneath the note was an old photo of me as a teenager, holding my first microphone, my parents standing behind me, proud but unsure. I realized he had been learning too. Maybe we all were. I framed that note and placed it beside the photo JIMIN gave me. 2 different chapters of my life, now standing side by side, one born of tradition, the other born of understanding. And somehow, they didn't clash. They belonged together. That evening, I called my parents again. My dad answered first. We talked about normal things, weather, food, my schedule. Before hanging up, I said, "Thanks for that note." There was a pause, then he said, "You taught us something, son." It's rare for him to say things like that, so I held on to those words like a gift. After the call, I sat down at the piano again. I played softly, the same melody that had followed me through every part of this story. But now it sounded whole, complete. I realized that music, family, friendship, they're all languages for the same thing, connection. And connection only grows when you stop trying to control it. I looked out the window, watching the city pulse with life, and I thought about how fragile everything is. We spend so much time trying to protect love that we forget love doesn't need protection. It needs space. It needs truth. It needs time. That night, I texted Jimin again. Mom wants to see you next weekend. Don't wear white or she'll think you're trying to steal the spotlight. He replied instantly, I'll wear pink. She can't say no to that. I laughed so hard, I almost dropped my phone. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized laughter is the purest sign that something once broken has healed. Before going to bed, I whispered a quiet prayer thanking the universe, my family, the members, and especially Jimin. Not for fixing me, but for staying long enough that I learned how to fix myself. Because that's what real love does. It doesn't rescue you. It reminds you that you are never beyond saving. Peace changes the way you move through the world. It softens your voice, slows your heartbeat, and turns even ordinary days into small miracles. After everything that happened, I started noticing things. I used to overlook the way morning light lands on the kitchen counter, the quiet hum of the fridge at 2 a.m., the sound of rain against the window while the city keeps breathing outside. For the first time in years, life didn't feel like something I was running from or performing for. It just felt like mine. I remember one particular morning when I woke up earlier than usual. The sky outside was gray, heavy with mist, and for some reason, I felt drawn to my phone. There was a message from Jimin. I had a weird dream about your mom making pancakes for us. I laughed out loud, still half asleep, and replied, you probably manifested that. She texted me last night asking what time you're coming next week. He sent back 3 laughing emojis and a heart. I smiled, realizing that this quiet, ordinary exchange was everything I'd been fighting for. Not drama, not spectacle, just simple, human connection that didn't need explanation. That weekend came faster than I expected. My mom had insisted on cooking again, this time saying she wanted to perfect the recipe Jimin had liked last time. I knew that was her way of saying she wanted to do better, to bridge the gap that had once existed between love and fear. When Jimin arrived, he brought flowers. He always does. My mom's face lit up when she saw them. You didn't have to, she said. I wanted to, he replied softly. It was such a small moment, but I felt it in my chest. Sometimes reconciliation doesn't arrive with fireworks. It walks in quietly holding flowers. Dinner was easier this time. My dad told stories about my childhood, the embarrassing kind, and Jimin laughed until he was wiping tears. My mom kept refilling his bowl every time it got half empty. There was warmth in the air, that kind of laughter that fills every corner of a house and makes it feel like home again. For the first time, I saw my parents looking at him not as Jimin from BTS, not as a symbol of anything complicated, but as a person, a friend, someone who made their son better. After dinner, we moved outside. The night was calm, the stars faint but visible. My mom brought tea, and Jimin stood beside me, looking up at the sky. You can see more stars here than in Seoul, he said. Yeah, I replied. Busan hides less, he smiled. You miss it? Every day, I said. But I think I had to leave to really understand what it meant to come back. He nodded, quiet for a moment. Then he said, you know, Kook, I think this is what forgiveness looks like. Not forgetting what happened, but being able to laugh in the same room again. I didn't answer, just took a slow sip of tea, letting the truth of that sink in. Because he was right. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. Later that night, after Jimin left, my mom sat beside me on the porch. The air smelled like the ocean. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, softly, she said, he's good for you. I looked at her, surprised, and she smiled, eyes gentle. I see the way you talk when he's around. You're calmer, more you. I couldn't find words, so I just said, thank you. She nodded. Love should make you peaceful, Jungkook. If it makes you smaller, it's not love. I carried those words with me long after that night. They became the quiet truth underneath everything. Love isn't about who fits into the picture, it's about who helps you see it clearer. A few days later, during practice, RM pulled me aside. "You seem lighter," he said, "like you finally put down something heavy." I smiled. "Maybe because I did." He nodded knowingly. "It's hard to walk when your heart's full of unspoken things." Then he added, "Write about it, not for anyone else, just for you." That night, I did. I sat down with a notebook and wrote about everything. The fear, the family tension, the dinner, the laughter, the healing. I wrote until my hand ached. And somewhere in those pages, I realized that pain only transforms when you give it a purpose. When you stop trying to escape it and start listening to what it's teaching you. I recorded a song the next day. It was raw, mostly vocals and piano. No fancy production, no layers, just me. The lyrics came out like confession. I almost lost the ones I love trying to please the world. But love waited for me at the table, patient and kind. When I played it for the members, no one spoke for a long time. Then JIMIN said, "That's the one." The world didn't hear that song. Maybe one day it will. But for now, it belongs to the people who lived it with me. That weekend, I went to visit my grandparents' graves with my parents. It's something we hadn't done together in years. As we stood there, my dad placed flowers on the stone and said quietly, "They'd be proud of you." I asked him, "For what?" He smiled, "For choosing people over pride." Driving back, I stared out the window, thinking about how many versions of love there are. The love between parent and child, between friends, between family, between fans and artists. Each one demanding a different kind of courage. And I realized that maybe life isn't about keeping love safe, it's about keeping it alive. That night, I got another message from my mom, a picture of her and JIMIN standing in the kitchen, smiling like old friends. The caption said, "He taught me to take selfies properly. I think I like him." I laughed so hard that I had to sit down. It was a full circle moment, the kind that feels too perfect to plan. I sent her a heart and said, "I told you he's good at everything." She replied, "You were right. Maybe love isn't meant to be understood first. Maybe it's meant to be seen." That line stayed with me for days because she was right too. We spend our lives trying to make people understand us when all they really need to do is see us unfiltered, unguarded, human. Later, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far we'd all come. From rejection to acceptance, from silence to laughter, from walls to bridges, and I realized something simple but profound. Love, when it's real, doesn't end where conflict begins. It begins where pride ends. And in that quiet, I whispered a thank you to my family for learning, to JIMIN for staying, and to the universe for timing it all so that healing arrived exactly when it was meant to. Sometimes peace isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with applause or grand endings. It slips in quietly, sits beside you, and stays. That's what the weeks after that photo felt like. The tension that once filled every phone call, every visit, every unspoken word had turned into something softer, like music fading into the background but never really stopping. I started finding joy in small things again, making breakfast while humming old BTS songs, reading fan letters that somehow always seemed to know what my heart needed, sitting in the studio late at night with just a guitar and a single light on. I wasn't chasing perfection anymore. I was chasing peace. One night, I got a message from Taehyung. It just said, "Busan this weekend?" I said yes, without even thinking. The next thing I knew, all of us, RM, Jin, Yoongi, Hobi, JIMIN, and me, were back in the city where it all began. No cameras, no staff, no makeup. Just 7 friends who had grown up under the same impossible sky. We stayed at a small seaside inn. It wasn't fancy, but it felt real. The owner didn't recognize us, which was a gift in itself. We walked along the beach at night, shoes in our hands, the sound of waves mixing with laughter. Jimin threw sand at me for saying he walked like an old man, and I chased him until we both fell down, gasping from laughter. RM just shook his head, muttering something about children disguised as global icons. But his smile gave him away. At one point, we all sat down facing the ocean, our shoulders touching, silence filling the spaces between us. It wasn't awkward, it was sacred. I think we all felt it, that unspoken gratitude for still having each other after everything life had thrown our way. Hobie broke the silence first. You know, Kook, your mom texted me, he said suddenly, grinning. I froze. What? She sent me a recipe for kimchi stew. Said I looked like I could use some home cooking. Everyone burst out laughing. My ears turned red, but my heart swelled. I could imagine her doing it too. That small gesture meant the world. It meant she not only accepted Jimin, but the whole world I came with. Later that night, as everyone drifted off to sleep, Jimin and I stayed on the porch watching the sea. The waves glowed faintly under the moonlight, each one fading before it could crash. You ever think about how much we've survived? He asked. I nodded. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes I think the world did too. He smiled. Then maybe that's good.